It was 4:30 in the morning when the silence of Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, shattered. A quiet town better known for its calm streets than federal headlines suddenly became the stage for one of the year's most daring operations. Doors splintered, tactical commands echoed, flashlights cut through the dark, and in just minutes the lives of 24 people were turned upside down. What neighbors thought was just another early morning became the scene of a federal sweep so precise that it felt like a military maneuver. ICE and FBI agents weren't chasing petty offenders. They were hunting the world's most feared gang, MS-13. At the top of their list was Oscar Alexis Martinez Lopez, a man wanted in El Salvador for homicide, and known for his violent ties to the transnational network. Alongside him, hardened enforcers and convicted criminals who had been hiding in plain sight. By sunrise, 24 suspects were in custody, their weapons ledgers and encrypted phones seized. But this wasn't just a raid. It was a revelation that even the most ordinary American town can become a staging ground for international crime. And if MS-13 could embed itself here, where else are they already waiting? For decades, the name MS-13 has carried a chilling weight. Born in the streets of Los Angeles during the 1980s, the gang grew through waves of deportations that scattered its members across Central America and eventually back into the United States. What started as a neighborhood crew became a sprawling transnational syndicate, feared for its brutality, assassinations, and extortion rackets. Today, federal estimates put their numbers at nearly 10,000 members across 40 U.S. states. On September 25, 2025, the threat surfaced in a place few would ever expect: Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, a town more familiar with school football games than organized crime. That morning, ICE agents from the Philadelphia field office, backed by the FBI's Gang Task Force, launched an operation that exposed just how far MS-13's reach had spread. This wasn't a simple arrest. It was a carefully calculated strike designed to dismantle a network before it could expand further into the American heartland. At the center of the storm stood Oscar Alexis Martinez Lopez, a man authorities say carried the scars and ink of a killer from El Salvador, along with Delina Amaya Perez, a Honduran national with violent convictions dating back to 2011. Their so-called safehouse off Interstate 99 wasn't just a hideout. It was a hub, a logistical post connecting Central America to major U.S. corridors. Bellefonte woke up that day to headlines of 24 arrests, but beneath the numbers lay a far greater warning. If MS-13 can set up shop here, then no community is too small, too quiet, or too safe. Before most of Bellefonte's residents had even stirred from their sleep, the town was already under the watch of federal eyes. At 4:30 a.m., black SUVs and unmarked tactical vehicles rolled into place along Interstate 99, their engines humming quietly in the dark. This wasn't going to be a door-kicking showdown in the middle of a neighborhood. The strategy was far more deliberate. Instead of storming the safehouse head-on, ICE officers and FBI Gang Task Force agents surrounded the escape routes, turning the town's lifeline highway into a trap. The reason was clear: federal agents knew who they were dealing with. MS-13 had a history of violence, often answering raids with gunfire, machetes, or ambush tactics. But here, the objective wasn't chaos. It was control. Tactical commanders made the call they would intercept vehicles leaving the safehouse one by one, isolating suspects without risking the lives of neighbors caught in the crossfire. The first stop came minutes after dawn broke. A sedan rolled out of the driveway, its headlights flickering against the empty road. Within moments, agents executed a precision stop. Inside, they discovered false IDs and encrypted phones tied to overseas contacts in El Salvador. Just blocks away, another vehicle was intercepted. This time, the find was even more telling: bundles of cash linked to extortion payments, carefully wrapped and ready for transfer. By the time the sun had risen, the trap had worked exactly as designed. Vehicle after vehicle was quietly pulled over, suspects cuffed, and evidence cataloged. Neighbors awakened by the sight of flashing lights at the edge of town had little idea they were witnessing one of the most sophisticated federal operations of the year. No shots fired, no civilians harmed, just precision patience and pressure applied at the right moment. The results spoke volumes. 24 suspects arrested, among them individuals already carrying deportation orders and others who had illegally re-entered after Title 42 removals. And at the top of the list, the man federal agents had spent months tracking Oscar Alexis Martinez Lopez, a figure tied directly to homicide charges in El Salvador. Alongside him, Delina Amaya Perez, whose criminal record stretched back more than a decade. For the agencies involved, the Bellefonte raid was more than just another arrest tally. It was proof that quiet towns could become staging grounds, and that a safe house hidden among ordinary homes could serve as a nerve center for transnational crime. The silence of dawn was broken that morning, not by violence, but by the deliberate surgical strike of federal forces sending one message, loud and clear. No gang is untouchable, and no town is off limits. When the dust settled and the tally was complete, federal officials revealed the names behind the operation's success. Among the 24 arrested, 2 stood out as the central targets of the raid. Oscar Alexis Martinez Lopez, his body marked with the tattoos that investigators say map his violent past, was not just another gang member. In El Salvador, he had been wanted for homicide, a fugitive whose reputation for brutality had crossed borders. To see his name on the Bellefonte arrest roster shocked many who had assumed figures like him only hid in the shadows of big cities. Yet here he was, living just blocks from ordinary families in rural Pennsylvania. Beside him stood Delina Amaya Perez, a Honduran national with a trail of violent convictions dating back to 2011. Known in intelligence files as an enforcer, Perez had long been associated with intimidation tactics, extortion collections, and keeping MS-13's cycle of fear intact. Federal agents describe him not as a peripheral figure but as someone deeply embedded in the operational structure of the gang, someone who kept others in line when the network threatened to unravel. But the list did not end with these 2. The remaining suspects painted a broader picture of MS-13's footprint. 7 individuals carried active deportation orders yet remained in the country using fake IDs and forged documents to blend into the community. 4 others had re-entered illegally after being expelled under Title 42, a stark reminder of how porous the borders of enforcement can become. Each arrest carried its own story of violent histories and ties to organized crime, adding weight to the operation's overall impact. For Bellefonte residents, these weren't just faceless names on a federal sheet. These were people who had been shopping in the same stores, driving the same roads, and renting homes in their neighborhoods. The revelation shook the community. What many thought was simply a rented house tucked near Interstate 99 turned out to be the operating base of a gang known globally for murder-for-hire drug trafficking and extortion schemes. Federal officials emphasized that this was no random sweep. The safe house was under surveillance for weeks. Its occupants carefully tracked its comings and goings, logged until the picture was complete. When the arrests came, they struck at the heart of the network. The operation not only removed dangerous individuals from the streets, but also sent a message to other cliques that small towns are not invisible to federal eyes. The capture of Lopez and Perez gave the operation its headline. But the deeper reality was even more sobering. If figures of this magnitude could quietly anchor themselves in Bellefonte, how many more remain hidden across rural America, waiting for the right moment to expand? The arrests were dramatic, but it was the evidence collected that told the real story. Inside, the vehicle stopped along Interstate 99, and within the walls of the Bellefonte safehouse, investigators uncovered a treasure trove of material that peeled back the layers of MS-13's presence in America. What they found was not the random clutter of desperate migrants trying to scrape by. It was the carefully arranged arsenal of an organized crime cell operating with purpose. The first clues came from the traffic stops. False identity cards, each equipped with matching backstories, hinted at a network skilled in creating alternate lives for its members. Next to them were encrypted cell phones, the kind designed to shield conversations from interception. When forensic analysts began probing, they discovered coded chats and digital maps pointing directly to 3 active MS-13 cliques in El Salvador and extending into 5 U.S. states: New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Virginia, and Massachusetts. Suddenly, Bellefonte was no longer a sleepy outpost. It was part of a transnational web. Inside the house itself, agents found rooms repurposed for logistics. Closets doubled as stash points for bundles of cash, some of it marked and traceable to extortion payments. Ledgers written in codes designed to mask their meaning outlined planned shipments and collection routes. Each line, once deciphered, exposed the mechanics of a network that thrived on fear and profit. Nearby stacks of forged documents waited ready to provide cover identities for anyone who needed to move undetected. Perhaps most disturbing were the communications devices, cheap phones linked to encrypted numbers in Central America. These weren't tools of survival. They were the lifelines of a cell maintaining real-time contact with superiors abroad. According to ICE Philadelphia, Oscar Alexis Martinez Lopez wasn't hiding in Bellefonte. He was deployed there, tasked with expanding the gang's reach, recruiting vulnerable youth, and embedding MS-13 deeper into Pennsylvania's working-class communities. The picture was unmistakable. Bellefonte had not been chosen at random. With its proximity to major cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, D.C., and the artery of I-99 cutting straight through the town was an ideal hub. Quiet enough to avoid immediate suspicion, yet connected enough to feed into larger networks. The seized evidence showed that the so-called safehouse was less a refuge and more a command post, one designed to test how far the gang could push into rural America. For investigators, the significance was sobering. Each seized phone ledger and forged ID was a reminder that MS-13 was not only present, but organized, intentional, and expanding. This was not the shadow of a gang on the run. It was the blueprint of a gang moving forward. To understand why a place like Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, became the backdrop for a federal raid, one must look at the history and evolution of MS-13 itself. Born in the immigrant neighborhoods of Los Angeles during the 1980s, the gang began as a loose-knit group of young Salvadorans seeking protection and identity in a hostile environment. But within a few years, what started as a street gang transformed into a violent organization known for its brutal assaults, machete attacks, and extortion schemes that terrorized entire communities. The growth of MS-13 accelerated when U.S. immigration policies led to mass deportations. Instead of dissolving the gang, deportations scattered its members across El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, where they rebuilt and expanded. From there, a cycle began. Deported members would return illegally, carrying gang culture across borders, while recruitment spread among vulnerable youth in both Central America and the United States. By the mid-2000s, federal agencies recognized MS-13 not as a local problem, but as a transnational criminal enterprise. Fast forward to 2025, and the landscape had shifted once again. With an estimated 10,000 members across more than 40 states, MS-13 no longer confined itself to the urban centers where it first took root. Federal data shows a clear trend: the gang is moving into rural America. Why? The reasons are calculated. Smaller towns often mean cheaper housing, fewer police resources and communities less accustomed to organized crime. In places where local youth face limited opportunities, the gang's promises of quick money and belonging become powerful recruitment tools. Bellefonte fit the profile perfectly. Just a few hours' drive from Philadelphia, New York City, and Washington, D.C., and sitting directly on Interstate 99, it provided a logistical corridor for moving drugs, money, and people. The town's modest size and limited law enforcement presence made it ideal for establishing a safehouse that could double as a command hub. Federal officials believed that figures like Oscar Alexis Martinez Lopez weren't just hiding from the law, they were actively sent to expand the gang's reach into new territories. What makes this alarming is not only the infiltration itself, but the strategy behind it. MS-13 has adapted. No longer content to dominate city streets alone, they are pushing into the suburbs and countryside places where the illusion of safety makes communities slower to detect the threat. The evidence seized in Bellefonte showed that this wasn't an accident. It was part of a broader plan to embed the gang in overlooked corners of the U.S. where they could operate quietly until fully established. The Bellefonte raid shattered the myth that MS-13 is only an urban menace. It demonstrated that the gang is evolving, leveraging geography, and exploiting gaps in enforcement to carve out space where it is least expected. For law enforcement, the challenge is no longer just in cities like Los Angeles or New York, it is everywhere. And for small-town America, the message is sobering. The battle lines have already reached your streets. The operation in Bellefonte was hailed as a clean success, 24 suspects in custody, no shots fired, no civilian injuries. For federal agencies, it became a textbook case of what can be achieved when ICE intelligence and FBI tactical execution work seamlessly together. But beyond the victory, a more unsettling truth emerged. If MS-13 could infiltrate this deeply into a quiet Pennsylvania town, then no community in America is immune. Officials were quick to emphasize the broader message. No town is too small, no gang is untouchable, one FBI spokesperson declared. The arrest of figures like Oscar Alexis Martinez Lopez and Delina Amaya Perez proved that law enforcement can dismantle dangerous networks before they metastasize. Yet community leaders cautioned that enforcement alone cannot solve the problem. For every raid, there are vulnerable young people facing limited opportunities, whose circumstances make them prime targets for recruitment. Without long-term solutions, schools' mentorship programs, and pathways away from crime, the cycle will continue. The evidence seized in Bellefonte highlighted how deliberate the gang's expansion has become. Cash bundles earmarked for extortion, forged IDs, and encrypted communications weren't signs of survival. They were signs of a network testing its reach, probing how far it could extend into places once thought safe. And the disturbing reality is that Bellefonte may not be unique. Federal analysts suspect there are dozens of similar safehouses scattered across the country, each blending into neighborhoods where no one thinks to look. For residents, the arrests shattered illusions. The idea that organized crime lives only in distant cities collapsed overnight. Suddenly, the threat was next door, and the man wanted for homicide abroad was a neighbor renting quietly in town. The raid forced Bellefonte to confront a new reality. Transnational gangs are no longer out there. They are here. The operation also raises important questions about the balance between immigration enforcement and community trust. While raids protect public safety, they also stir fears among immigrant populations, many of whom are unconnected to crime but feel the weight of suspicion. How law enforcement navigates this tension will determine whether future operations strengthen communities or deepen divides. Perhaps the most important takeaway from Bellefonte is vigilance. Federal agencies cannot fight this battle alone. They rely on tips, local awareness, and the willingness of communities to report suspicious activity. awareness becomes the first line of defense against groups like MS-13, whose strategy depends on invisibility. If a gang can quietly transform a rented home into a hub for extortion and trafficking, then the eyes and ears of the public are crucial to stopping them before they grow stronger. Bellefonte is safer tonight, but the challenge remains. If MS-13 reached this far, where else are they already preparing to move next? That unanswered question lingers long after the headlines fade. While the Bellefonte raid is celebrated as a tactical victory, the broader implications extend far beyond one town in Pennsylvania. Experts in security and immigration policy warn that cases like this highlight a recurring tension in America's fight against transnational gangs. Enforcement can disrupt networks, but it rarely dismantles the root conditions that allow them to thrive. On the federal level, the operation demonstrated the effectiveness of multi-agency coordination. The fact that ICE intelligence worked seamlessly with FBI tactical teams is a model for future crackdowns. Yet even federal officials quietly acknowledge that for every cell taken down, others may already be forming. The adaptability of groups like MS-13 with their ability to blend into small communities makes them uniquely difficult to contain. On the state and local level, officials face a different challenge. Raids reassure communities, but they can also create fear among immigrant populations who may feel unfairly targeted or alienated. Community trust is essential because without cooperation from residents, law enforcement loses its most important tool: information. When people are too afraid to report suspicious activity, gangs gain space to expand unchecked. There is also an economic dimension. Small towns like Bellefonte often struggle with limited resources, stagnant job markets, and vulnerable youth populations. These conditions form the breeding ground where gangs can recruit, offering quick money and a sense of belonging. Without long-term investment in schools, jobs, and outreach programs, enforcement alone becomes a revolving door, arresting one group of offenders while the next waits to take their place. At the national security level, the Bellefonte raid underscores how America's transportation corridors, highways like Interstate 99, can become arteries not only for commerce, but also for organized crime. Analysts warn that ignoring rural vulnerabilities risks giving gangs a strategic advantage, allowing them to establish footholds in overlooked areas before spreading outward again. Ultimately, the Bellefonte case is not just a law enforcement story. It is a reminder of how global crime networks intersect with local realities. It shows that the fight against MS-13 cannot be waged by raids alone, nor can it be left solely to federal agencies. It requires a multi-layered response: enforcement, prevention, community trust, and international cooperation. Without that, victories like Bellefonte will be significant but temporary. On the morning of September 25, 2025, the town of Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, woke up changed. What had seemed like an ordinary safe house was exposed as the nerve center of a transnational gang, and by day's end, 24 suspects were in federal custody. The names, the evidence, and the precision of the operation told a clear story. MS-13 is evolving, and no corner of America is off limits. For the people of Bellefonte, the arrests brought relief, but also unease. Relief that dangerous fugitives like Oscar Alexis Martinez Lopez were removed from their streets. Unease because the raid proved that even the quietest neighborhoods can hide shadows deeper than anyone imagined. What happened here is both a warning and a lesson. Federal forces can act with speed and strength, but lasting safety requires vigilance from every level: national, local, and individual. The message is unmistakable: MS-13 will keep adapting, but so will those determined to stop them. Every safe house dismantled, every false ID seized, and every suspect taken off the street is one less threat to American communities. Yet the fight continues in towns large and small. Bellefonte's story reminds us that organized crime thrives in silence, and that awareness is our strongest defense. Stay informed, stay alert, and never assume your community is untouched. Because if it can happen here, it can happen anywhere.